a very 101 nuts and bolts presentation coming from our County Superintendent, Dr. De La Torre. We also will have a community discussion / panel with some very distinguished panelists, CTA, CSCA. We will also have public advocates, the Education Trust West, and Californians for Justice. So we're going to have a very rich evening full of information. After that panel, Californians for Justice will convene those of you who would like to for some community dialogue and to talk about what you heard today, get your reactions, and just get some feedback from you about what you'd like to see moving forward as far as community discussions go. Today's event is hosted and put on by the Alum Rock Educational Foundation. From Mesa here from Alum Rock Educational Foundation. As well as District 5 United, we have Juan Estrada here from District 5 United. Californians for Justice. Here from Californians for Justice. Clap. Thank you to our students. So first I just want to introduce some dignitaries we have in the room. We're all VIPs, but we have some elected people, or people who are representing some of our distinguished electeds. So we have President of the Santa Clara County Board of Education, Grace Maw. We also have Community College District, Evergreen Valley City Community College District Trustee Wendy Ho. Alex Suara, the wonderful Alex Suara, representing Senator Jim Bell. We're going to meet her later, but the Honorable Andrea Flores Shelton from the Alum Rock Union. And in case, I don't know many of you, or I might know some of you, my name is Darcy Green. I'm with the Santa Clara County Board of Education. Am I forgetting any honorables? Anyone representing an honorable? Well, we have one other person who may not be elected, but because of the job he has, I certainly consider him honorable, and that's Alum Rock Superintendent Stephen Fisk. One last person to point out, former ESA Union Superintendent Bob Nunez. So with that, if I could bring up Superintendent De La Torre, who's been with us for about a year now in this county, from California, then Texas, and then, are you always back home? Back home. From California. So he is here to give us a presentation. I don't know if you want to introduce your staff, but they will be laying the foundation, giving us some basic grounding on what LCSF is, and really setting the stage for the panel discussion that will follow.
I'll try and use my loud voice. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here this evening, and I really appreciate the opportunity to provide you with an overview of a system that is significantly different than what we have been accustomed to in the state of California, and that is the local control funding formula, and tied to that, of course, is the local control accountability plan. I know I was going to have a problem with that. We have about a 20, maybe 25-minute presentation, but I'd like to preface the presentation with that what we're sharing with you today is what we know today, and that the implementation, the successful evolution from the old revenue model to this new model is predicated on a number of things. The first is predicated on the economy remaining strong and growing over the next 7 years. And because the timeline is a 7-year timeline before there is full implementation, there's always the possibility that a new governor and a new legislature may make changes to what we're presenting today before it's fully implemented. With me today, I have my resident expert, Ms. Micaela Ochoa, who is the Chief Business Officer for the Santa Clara County Office of Education, and her assistant, Ted O, who is the Director of Internal Business at the Santa Clara County Office of Education. I think Micaela is very familiar with the Alum Rock School District. She spent some time there in their finance department, and I'd like her to give you the overview today, and then all of us, including Mr. O and I, can answer any questions that you may have at the conclusion of the presentation. Does that sound all right? All right.
Just basically an overview of the governor's budget and what he presented and what was eventually adopted by the state in June, and how that affects public education today. If we could just think about before this new local control funding formula, there were essentially two buckets of revenue. One was unrestricted, and for most districts in California, that about 92% of that unrestricted pot was dedicated to salaries and benefits. And then there's another bucket, a restricted or categorical, we use the two synonymously. Within that categorical bucket, there were several different programs, but if we could just think about those two buckets as the baseline for where we are today and where we're going into the future. Two buckets, unrestricted, about 92% was allocated to salaries and benefits for districts in California, and then the categorical bucket, which was the restricted or the categorical. So I'll be talking a little bit about that as well, and I'll actually go through, and in your packet you have a list of all the programs that we once, all the programs and revenue that we once received that no longer exist. And there are several programs or several categorical buckets on that list that your districts had received in the past. Those are no longer available. They are now redistributed in a whole different fashion, and I will go through that as well.
Just in turn.
Oh, okay. Oh, great. And then I'll go through the program requirements, and the other requirement with the governor's budget is, so right now the county office has fiscal oversight of districts. There is now an additional responsibility at the county office, and that's the programmatic piece. That did not exist before. It becomes effect as a result of this new law. So on June 27th, the governor passed the budget, and that there's a legal requirement that the state adopt a budget every year to take effect by July 1st. We haven't always had that. When that budget was adopted, the local control funding formula kicked in. This is the biggest change. What the governor and the state adopted is the biggest change that we've ever seen in 40 years in public finance. And it's a big difference to the way that public education and the way that public education has historically been funded. Those categorical programs that I talked about, if we think about two buckets, unrestricted and restricted, in that restricted pot, there's about 40 different programs. Again, I mentioned earlier, those all go away, and the funds for those programs are now redistributed. Now, when you look at the information and the data and the dollars associated with the way in which we are now funded, you might think, oh my gosh, there's a lot more money. As Dr. De La Torre mentioned, that full implementation it does not take effect this year. It's over a period of 7 to 8 years, depending on how the economy progresses. So if the economy doesn't progress, that funding on an annual basis will be impacted, which makes it a lot more difficult for districts to project into budget. There's about $25 billion that are allocated or dedicated for the local control funding formula, and of that, and that's through 2021. But again, that assumes a lot of the things that Dr. De La Torre mentioned. If any of that changes, then so does that allocation, that $25 billion. For 13-14, okay, so people might ask, okay, well, how much do we get this year? For 13-14 at the state level, there's $2.1 billion allocated for school districts and charter schools. And charter schools, for the most part, are held to the same standard as the school districts. Whereas before, they haven't always been held to the same standard. In general, they're pretty much held to the same standard as school districts are, including that programmatic piece that I'll go through in just a bit. There's $32 million that's allocated for county offices of education, but I'm not going to go into the county office model. I'm going to focus on the district model.
Could you tell us how that compares to what it would have been without this new model?
The amount it would have, so, great question. So if this model had not taken effect, districts that have historically had, because the new model is based on English learners, students in poverty, which they measure by students who are on free and reduced lunch, and English learners, students in poverty, and foster youth, if a district has more concentrations of students in those categories, then they will receive more revenue as a result. So I can't necessarily speak in general terms, but I can speak more in terms of that concept. Then those districts that have fewer amounts of students in those categories, then they will not receive as much money. In fact, for some districts, by third year, fourth year, they will actually be in trouble. For some districts that have historically been funded at higher level, where they have fewer concentrations of those students. Did that kind of sort of answer it? And if there are any other questions throughout the presentation, please, feel free to ask. But the other caution is that there are many areas in this local control funding formula that have not been worked out. There's so many questions that we have, and we as advocates for the districts meet at the state level to ask those questions so that when we have our discussions with the CBOs of the districts and people in curriculum and instruction, we're able to provide that information. There's still a lot that's unanswered. Okay, so what programs are included? All these programs listed here, and you have it on your page, slide 4 at the bottom. It's the actual slide 7 though, but no, page 4. Or I'm sorry, not page 3. Thank you. Thanks. If you look at that list, one of the programs that I think most of the districts in this area receive, most districts, Economic Impact Aid. Districts will no longer receive revenue for Economic Impact Aid. It's now distributed in a whole different way. Another one is oral health, peer assistance review, the block grants. Those all go away. So how is that money redistributed? 2 pots, unrestricted, restricted, and then within restricted there were various programs. Now, we had these 2 categories before. Now we have a category called base grant, a category called augmentation to the base grant, supplemental grant, concentration grant, and then add-ons. So how does this all work? And again, as we talked about earlier, the full implementation for all of this will take about 7 to 8 years. What they're estimating right now is about 8 years. Could be 10, could be 5, could be longer, we don't know. But this is the current estimate. So base grant, that's the first one. Here is, on this slide, we have the amount for K to 3, 4 to 6, 7 to 8, and 9 to 12. And so you might think, oh my gosh, that's a lot more than we actually have received. Remember, this is the first pot, but this is not the full amount that you receive in the current year. This will take about that 8-year, 7 to 8 year period for full implementation. Before this, there was an allocation, 1 per ADA allocation for K-8 districts. There was a different ADA allocation for unified school districts, and there was a different allocation for high school districts. If you recall, not just long ago, we had basically 3 allocations. Now it's broken up by grade level. And so these grade spans per pupil they basically increase, or supposed to increase by the cost of living adjustment. The second category is augmentation to the base grant. This is an additional amount that districts get for K to 3 class size reduction and the career technical education program. And it's about $712 for K to 3, and then but districts have to make progress toward reducing their K to 3 class size down to 24 to 1. And you have so much time to do that, otherwise you get penalized. And then the career technical education funding, that's about $216 per ADA. So that's category 2. Next category, supplemental grant. This is where those 3 categories that I talked about earlier, the students in poverty, free and reduced lunch, and EL, this is where that starts to kick in. So if you take that base grant, you saw that table, K to 3, so forth, that's the base grant. You take the supplemental grant is equal to 20% of that. So you get 20% additional in addition to that amount for each English language learner, student who is eligible for free or reduced price meals, or foster students. Now, if one of those students falls in each one of those categories, it doesn't get counted 3 times. It only gets counted once, so it's unduplicated is what they call it. Each school district and charter school must report this, and the county office is required to review and validate the counts that are submitted for each of these categories. So it's kind of like the audit process.
Can I ask you something?
Yes, yes.
So, the base plus 20% for each of those kids. Each kid gets 20% more.
It's 20%, this category here, so we take 20% of that if your population qualifies for these categories, students in these categories.
So if each side has 3 schools that are like that and the others are not, then we might not even be part of that.
It's for the district.
So you don't know anything about the district. You come today with generality, or do you later on will say each side will get this and Alum Rock will get this? Or no?
I actually do have data for district, but for today we just wanted to provide the general overview, and I think if there are follow-up questions, we can answer those questions specifically offline.
Well,
We can do that offline. And I know I have 4 minutes, I'm sorry. It's a lot of information, and we just tried to consolidate it. So that's the supplemental grant, and then we have the concentration grant. So we go through the base, we go through the augmentation. The third category is the concentration grant. This is additional money, and this is equal to 50% of the base grant for the students if the population in that district is 55% or above. So, and I think most of the districts that were today, Alum Rock and Franklin McKinley and with Mount Pleasant, I believe Mount Pleasant, qualify. So districts, there are districts who qualify for this, and then there are other districts who will not qualify for the concentration grant, so they don't get that extra revenue. And then there's the add-ons. And these add-ons are for transportation services, and they're for that targeted instructional improvement block grant that most districts have received historically. And if districts have provided transportation, you are required to continue to provide the same level that you did in 2012-13. That is a legal requirement based on that local control funding formula. This is just an illustration of how the funding formula worked before the governor and the state approved this new local control funding formula. There was basically the revenue limit and then categorical programs, the restricted. So it was basically 2 pots. Within categorical, there were several different programs, but now we have the base, we have the class size reduction and the CTE augmentation, then we have the supplemental grant, the concentration grant, and then the add-on. So now you see this was supposed to be a lot simpler, but now we actually have a lot more categories than we did before. It'll take about 8 years for full implementation. So you might ask, well, what exactly does the 8 years mean? When you calculate your total dollars based on this new formula, that gets spread over 8 years. We don't get all the money in 13-14. So right now the estimate is for 13-14, it's about 11% of whatever that calculation is. But again, if the economy continues to do well, then this is what this is based on. If the economy starts to tame, or there are issues with how they're going to generate additional revenue to replace Prop 30, we just have a lot of uncertainties and unknowns. And then on the class size reduction, there is an increase to class size reduction of about 10.4%. That's what I talked about earlier. Districts get an additional $723 for K-3. And in order to receive those dollars, districts have to show progress of reducing class size in K-3 back down to 24. Before, you recall, it was 20-1, 20-1, 20-1. Now it's 24-1. So if you're at 30-1 every year over that 7-year, 8-year period, you have to make progress toward reducing the class size to 24-1. And that's at each school site. That's a critical piece. It has to be done at each school site. If one school site doesn't meet that and the others do, there's that penalty. So now, before you could do the averages, now it's by school site. deferred maintenance and restricted routine maintenance. Deferred maintenance is that revenue that, or the money that districts historically have received to do projects of deferred maintenance, like roofs, like carpets, anything that's deferred type of maintenance. It's now included as part of this new allocation. So before you would receive money specifically to do facility repairs, now that money goes away and it's included as part of this augmentation and concentration and those categories. Restricted routine maintenance, the flexibility is set aside that 1%, and that basically is usually the restricted routine maintenance goes to fund like maintenance workers, gardeners, those types of positions. The 3% set aside is required after June 30th of 2015, so there's still that flexibility. If you recall, districts were allowed to keep that money flexible and use it for other purposes. If you want more information on that, I'd be happy to talk with you after. Those districts that may be affected negatively as a result of this in the current year, they will be held harmless. So they will continue to receive the same revenue that they received in 12-13 and 13-14. Does that make sense? You're held harmless basically if your calculation shows that you will get fewer dollars in the current year than you did last year, you will receive the same amount that you received last year. So you're held harmless for the short period. Okay, adult education. So adult education. So basically, adult education, and that's on page 17, they're required to maintain the same levels of funding the program as they did in 12-13. So in the current year, if you spent $100 in 12-13 on adult ed, you were required to continue to spend that amount in the current year. You cannot spend fewer dollars. You have to maintain the program. And actually that must be maintained not just for the current year, but also for 2014-15, so it's a 2-year maintenance. And the transition fund, adult ed or ROP in transportation, I talked about that earlier. You're required to continue to spend that same amount of money in the current year. Okay, so the other key piece, fiscal oversight. We know about that. We know about that at the county office. There will now be a programmatic oversight from the county office. And what that means is that districts will be required to submit what they're calling the local control and accountability plan. We don't know what that looks like yet. The draft is supposed to come out from the state in March. Once we get that, we'll start working with the districts on that. But that plan will need to be developed by the districts. There will need to be substantial input from a variety of stakeholders. The boards at the districts will need to approve those, and then those will need to go to the county office, and the county office will need to approve them. So if the county office, so first it has several approvals at the district, and then the county has to approve them, and then they need to go to the state. So that currently takes place on the fiscal side with the budgets. That's it. Now it will take place on the programmatic side with programs. That's basically everything on local control. All right, so a sample district, I want to thank Alum Rock for allowing us to share some of their data. You can see that assuming best case scenario, everything works out as planned, this is how the revenue will grow through 2015-16 for Alum Rock. But that assumes that the economy continues to flourish. That assumes that, you know, Prop 30 that voters passed that generates additional revenue that's dedicated to school districts that's due to expire, and I believe part of it is due to expire 2 more years. The full expiration, I think, is 2018. Where do we come up with that additional revenue? When that tax goes away, we need to the state needs to figure out what's going to make up for that revenue, as well as several other economic factors. So this would be a best case scenario. If we go, and that revenue, there needs to be a local control and accountability plan that is tied to the revenue
I'll
that
just make
comes
my own.
into, in this case, Alum Rock. This slide here is intended to demonstrate what the projections would be in a best case scenario. Well, in a scenario based on the assumptions that the state is using right now. So you have the funding for ADA when you add all the different sources, and then you can see through 2015-16, it goes up to about 9,200. Again, just caution that that assumes the best, the best case scenario. If anything goes wrong, or just cautions on. There are many unknowns about the local control funding formula. It's very new. The state is still trying to work through a lot of details. We could have a new governor. There's no, before with Proposition 98, that was in statute. That was law. This is not written in statute. So it makes it easier to change. The state determines how much to put toward LCFF, so we talk about these projections over 8 years, but really, it's the state who decides, ultimately, how much is dedicated to fund this for school districts. The impact, the decline in enrollment in some districts, that will have a negative impact. And then the number of years to reach. Right now, the estimate is 8, but like I mentioned earlier, it could be 5, it could be 12, we don't know. As Dr. De La Torre mentioned, and I mentioned, we could have a new governor, there could be changes in the economy, and then that Prop 30, that additional tax that taxpayers approved a couple of years ago, we need to determine, the state needs to determine what will replace that. So I apologize, it took a little bit longer, but I love this topic. This is great. This is great.
You did an outstanding job. I'm a little bit of a visual learner, so let me see if I can do it very quickly for you. Would you mind helping me out? I can use tweet. Come here. This student generates $1. Okay? Because he's not an English learner. He's not a student with special needs. He's not socioeconomically disadvantaged. And the allocation is $1. This student, if he's in any one of those 3 categories, generates 20% more. So for funding purposes, this student, the English learner, the student with special needs, the student who is either a foster youth or homeless, would receive $1.20. If this student happens to go to a school where more than 50% of the students at that school are like him, he gets an additional 55%. So if this student is generating $1, this student in some districts has the potential to generate $1.70. The reason there's an accountability plan is because the state wants to make sure that those 70 cents that he gets in addition to the $1, they want to make sure that they're actually being invested in him. That they're not being diluted for all the students, even those that don't qualify. So the local control accountability plan is a mechanism that the state will use to hold districts accountable for 2 things. One is that this student does in fact get 70 cents invested in his education. And the second, probably most important, that because of that investment, he's making academic improvement over time. When the student is either not having that money invested in his or her education, or that student isn't demonstrating growth over time, it triggers the county's role as an accountability body to say, you're receiving all of this additional revenue for this student, yet when we look at your academic achievement data, we've not seen the needle move. So one of the way it's being framed is that this local control funding formula is an investment in those students who have impediments, challenges in their life that require greater resources to provide them with that same world-class education. But because it's coming from our taxpayers, they want to see that that investment is generating a return. Because if it doesn't, then the argument that the reason students aren't performing well in school is because education isn't being funded adequately will die. Because when a new legislature comes in, if it hasn't evolved the way that we believe it's going to evolve, if we don't make the best use of those resources, and this student doesn't make any progress and continues to have a poor experience in school, it will be much more difficult to convince the general public to continue and fund public education when we've demonstrated that an extra 70 cents didn't seem to have the outcome that we promised it would have. The districts that aren't happy are the districts that have this student, or a majority of these students, who are going to get the $1, and that $1 holds them harmless for 2 years. But in those districts, operating costs will go up, healthcare costs for employees will go up, collective bargaining may result in increased compensation, and so they'll begin to lose money and be in danger of deficit spending because they're getting $1 for a student, while these districts can potentially be getting $1.20 or $1.70, but with greater expectations. Does that make sense?
Yes.
That, in a nutshell, is the new local control funding formula. Yeah? Pizza. No, there's more.
Thank you. Thank you, County.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to bring up Andrea.
And
And Maya-
Maya Esparza, trustee for Franklin McKinley School District. Thank you for being here.
Maya Esparza, Maya from Franklin McKinley. Thank you so much for being here. We also have Vanessa Castellanos who joined us as well from San Jose Unified.
Good evening again. I'm Andrea. I am a new trustee to Allen Rock School District and pleased to help facilitate this amazing panel tonight. And I just want to thank Darcy Green for pulling our community partners together in the county office for that very, I'd say, pretty good high-level presentation for something so dense and so detailed. So thank you. And I really think that this is the start of a process for helping this community envision that $1.70 per student. Really, how can we really get to that level of improvement that we hold so dear for our kids, that we know that we want the best for our children? So how do we make the most of turning that $1.70 into the vision that we have, as we've struggled with funding for so many years? This is our opportunity to understand what the process is, what it's taken to get to this point, and then really hearing from the experts in terms of how we can get the community involved in the next step. So I'm going to start with David Hernandez. Thank you so much for being here from CTA. And we really do want to start with you in terms of how is the community involved in this process moving forward?
Okay, do I make my comments first and then answer the question?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Well, good evening. I'm David Hernandez, and I'm representing the Teachers Association. And I'm glad to be here. I taught at the Allen Rock School District for 25 years. Many of my former students might even be in the audience. And this year, CTA basically celebrates 150 years as an association, a strong advocate for public education and social justice issues. We worked very much on the passage of Proposition 98 that guaranteed 40% of state budget to education, to winning the lawsuit against Governor Schwarzenegger to repay $2.9 billion to education, which led to the Quality Education Investment Act, to supporting Governor Brown recently in the local control funding formula. CTA basically believes that the federal government should provide adequate funding for education in order for school districts to fulfill the goals of providing quality education and necessary resources to meet the individuals of all students. We echo the sentiments of Governor Jerry Brown that we must make education in our state more equitable. Quote, equal treatment for children in unequal situations is not justice, end quote. We agree that students with the greatest needs, English language learners, foster students, and low-income family students require additional resources to achieve state academic standards. Therefore, our CTA State Council adopted budget principles that define and support the governor's proposed local control funding formula as one that provides equal funding for students most in need, the restoration of the deficit factor, an annual cost of living adjustment, while the formula is being implemented over a period of several years, and of course class size reduction in K-3. We believe that the funding must be based on enrollment and that the quantifiable data is consistently applied and publicly available. Funding for implementation of Common Core standards is actually very paramount, and we commend the governor to add in an extra $1.25 billion to do so in staff development, in curriculum and technology. We believe that the local control funding addresses education funding on the basis of fairness and equity among all California students. Now, we all know that over 50% of our students in California are comprised of ELL students and others who require additional sources. And it's our responsibility to stand behind a proposal that seeks to improve the fair and equal opportunity for all students to succeed. And after many years of almost $20 billion in cuts over the last 4 years, our students have been faced with being seen larger class sizes, less class sections available for them to go to, higher tuition, and fewer teachers basically in the classroom. We support the redistribution of these dollars so that equity and fairness can finally be established after all these years of major inequities with former funding system. And we applaud the governor for taking on such a bold and historic proposal. The funding for the implementation of Common Core standards is basically important, and it's extremely important for educators to receive proper training and staff development so that there's a seamless efficiency, as well as provide students with technical resources as we move forward. We know that the $1 billion that the governor proposed for the Common Core standards is not enough, but we know it's in the right direction. We support the class size reduction, 24:1. Of course, we like to see it go back to the 2007, 2008 years, or 20:1, because research continuously shows that when you have a smaller class size, students tend to do better in closing the achievement gap, or whichever gap you might want to put in there. And it's really important that we move in that direction. LCFF basically provides schools with greater flexibility and greater authority over these resources, and it requires each district to adopt a local accountability plan. This is where the community comes in. It's really important for the community to be engaged. Not only parents, not only community organizations, but students as well are involved in this accountability plan, as well as educators and administration. We believe that accountability plan must ensure the supplemental dollars are sent to the local school districts and spent on disadvantaged students. We have dropped to 49th. We've been there as far as per pupil funding over the last 20 years. Even with the LCFF money that we're getting, it still doesn't bring us up to the national average. However, we believe that these monies are going in the right direction in order to be able to provide those funds to the students of greatest needs. We welcome the upturn of the economy. We hope that it stays that way, because as you saw in the previous slides, when the funding continues to rise, there's going to be more money for our students in our schools. And basically, CTA, we look forward to work collaboratively with our community and parents and administration and our sister unions to develop a comprehensive plan that is going to meet the needs of our student population. Thank you.
All right, and before we move on to Jai, I just want to say in Allen Rock School District, we have a 21:1 for our students thanks to the voters and a parcel tax. We do not have a 24:1, so we're very proud again of trying to keep those class sizes low here in Allen Rock. So thank you, David, and we will come back with more questions. We're going to hear from everybody first briefly. So Jai Superstar, thank you for coming and joining us from the California School Employees Association.
I have about 5 minutes.
Yes.
Well, thank you very much I hope you can all hear me all the way back there. Thank you very much for including the classified school employees. My name is Jai Suprasad. I represent CSCA. We basically represent 220,000 classified school employees. These are all the other adults on the campus that are not teachers. So we are the school secretary, the teacher's aide, the bus drivers, all the folks who help to provide a clean, safe learning environment so that our students are ready to learn. But also equally important, I'm a parent of 2 children, who's 9 and 4, so 9-year-olds in the system right now. And last week, I was actually at a very similar forum like this, and I can sense the frustration of a lot of parents and faculty members and others about where is the money? Right? Isn't there supposed to be more money coming into the system? And why are we just having such a hard time trying to figure out this formula? People tell us this formula is completely confusing about whether schools are going to get more or less money. I will try to address that as quickly as possible and then give you a chance to ask more questions later. And just to give a little bit background from where I come from, I have been serving this state for almost 20 years before joining CSCA. I was in the legislature helping first Lynn Easton, who became the state superintendent, as a representative from the Department of Education. And then I actually worked also in the legislature to look at in the appropriations committee, which decides, right? Everybody has a great idea about new ideas for our schools, but ultimately it costs money. And then legislators have to decide, is this a good idea or not? And so this proposal, this program, the LCFF, is essentially one of those new ideas, as has been mentioned, within the past 40 years of school finance, and I've done it for 20 years here. It's an incredible change that's confusing a lot of people. The bottom line is some schools are going to see a lot of new money. It depends on whether you have poor kids, English language kids, or foster youth. That's how the formula is built. I think your superintendent did a great job in comparing this student get $1, the next student gets $1.20. And I think at the end of all the calculation, they can get up to 50% more from the base grant. But that means nothing to the average parent. Right? You're not there to calculate each of these students. The headache, I think, for parents is that they want to know if there's more money at their school so they can get new programs. Didn't we just pass Prop 30? Didn't we just have all these new funding promised under this LCFF? Why are we still having a hard time? And a large part of that is because education is a labor-intensive industry. It is based on teachers and class 5 helping to take care of all the students, learn and make sure they're safe in our schools. The cost for their salaries, cost for their health care, all those costs are pushing against this money that's coming in. So for the school board members, I know I have many friends who are on the school boards in Sacramento who come to me and ask, what do I do here? The budget's supposed to give me more money, but I'm stuck. I don't seem to have enough money to do more services here because all the money's kind of been claimed for all the pressure of increasing costs in our school. At Bao School site, for example, we could barely get enough toilet paper, we could barely get enough just white paper to make Xeroxes on. But that's because our teachers and classified have gone for many years of cuts, you have heard earlier. For whatever reason, people don't recognize that California is funded 49th in the country on per pupil funding. We're at the bottom, and there's a price that you pay for them. Every school that I've been to, and I've been to San Bernardino last month, and Sacramento this last week, and now here today, there's a price that you pay when we're funded at that level. The pressure is very real at the school site when you run out of basic white papers to do Xerox. We're funding our schools at the bare bone, and that needs to be recognized. This new funding formula that the government has put in is very important. But it's going to shift, basically, there's no new money at the state level. It will shift some money between school districts to others. And so now we come to you and say, the employees like us will be coming and saying, you know what, schools have been cut by $20 billion. How are you going to be able to make up to restore all those services that we don't have over the past 4 or 5 years? And I see that my time's running out. But that's to paint for you all the pressure that's in play. And if you're frustrated, I'm really glad to see that there's a chart. There's a lot of information at the state level for you to figure out how much is my school getting more. And then you can get to the next question about, with that additional money, how do I spend that money? Where do we spend it? We hope that you will help spend to restore staff because ultimately they're the ones that are providing the services to the students, whether it's reading program or bringing them on the school campus and all those things. So I'd be happy to answer more. But those are some of the pressure you'll be facing as community members.
Thank you, Jai. And keep those questions coming on the index cards. And now we're going to turn it over to Valerie Cuevas, Director of the Education Trust. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. As mentioned, my name is Val Cuevas. I'm Director of External Relations with EdTrust West. EdTrust West is a nonprofit state education civil rights organization. We're a policy research and advocacy organization, particularly looking at how we close opportunity and achievement gaps and identify solutions that will forever close those gaps. And one of the areas we've been working on in particular is local control funding formula. One of the things that we've been really focused on is how do we take all this information and make it digestible? How many of you already have your head spinning about all the information that you've heard? Okay, so what I want to do is give you some basics. What is LCFF in terms of the context in California and how it came about? It really was a conversation in the legislature of the notion that we are, in fact, yes, we have a funding problem in California when it comes to education. But for the money we have, we weren't distributing that equally according to student need. Some districts, depending on when they decided to sign up for categoricals, depending on what their revenue limit was when Prop 13 was put into place, we have a neighbor district and another district here with totally different funding amounts per student. So that was the rationale behind why we wanted to make this shift after 40 years. And equity was an important part of that conversation. If you remember, Governor Brown talked about equal treatment for children in unequal situations is not justice. And so when you think about what does it mean for students getting greater investment, I want to tell you it's not just for those students. The majority of the students in California are going to benefit from this. We have more than 70% students of color in the state of California as a whole. We have more than 55–60% of students who are free and reduced lunch. So across the state, we're talking about districts seeing an impact as a result of this new law. When it comes to whether it is actually in code, it is code. I can tell you right now that the old code for funding doesn't exist anymore. The new code does. Is actually 42238. Okay? So this is the new way that we fund. It took effect July 1. It's a large investment. You've seen some of that before. It is phased in over 8 years. However, every district will get more than what they got last year in this first year. Okay, so for what you might have experienced last year, every district, no matter who you are, going to get more. Upon full implementation, you'll get at least as much money as you did in 2007, 2008. Okay, next. So how does it work? These are the 3 things, buzzwords I want you to remember. Base grant, supplemental grant, concentration grant. Okay? Those are the big 3 ways that money is going to come to your district. Base grant. The state has said every student will generate, no matter who you are, for you having a student at your school, is going to generate a base amount. Every student will get that amount. Every student will get their education provided for. Okay? Well, we talked about the investment that might be needed in other students. And that's where you get the supplemental grant, which is basically the 20% extra that folks talked about. And then you get a concentration grant, which means if I'm a school that's serving a lot of the students, that means I have more than 55% of those students at my district, I'm going to get a concentration grant, which is an additional 50% of funding for each of those students, above the 55%. And then there's the accountability plan that folks talked about. It talks about state priority areas and specific actions in those areas. There are certain things that are you're right, and folks have talked about it. Lots of confusion. What's going on? Well, the reason is because the legislature passed this law, and then they said, State Board of Education, we want you to come up with the rules on how districts are supposed to implement that law. And that's where all the confusion is happening right now. Because there are all these different interests talking about, well, really, what does that law really mean by the way it's written? Does it really mean we have to give that money to those students and their programs and their services? Or does it mean we can just fill budget districts that might be in deficits? Because those are real issues from previous years. What does it mean for each one of those that base grant, the supplemental, the concentration? What are the rules behind how you can use that money? Okay? That's what's happening in Sacramento right now. And we will say that as an advocacy organization, we have a clear stance on what those rules should talk about. The first one is assurances, which is if you're a student and you're driving money to the district because of who you are and your needs, then the district should in fact follow what it says in the law, because it's written in the law, that you must provide increase or improve or increase services to those students. I can tell you what the code is, you can look it up. Improved or increased. But right now at the state board, people are saying, does it really mean that? Does it or doesn't it? Because you know what, it's real. It costs money to educate students. And there are a lot of needs related to it. Our angle though, because full disclosure is, those are the students that need it the most. That's what part of the intent of the law was. And we would say that we have insurances. Can you go back? Okay. The second one is funding transparency. Community members, parents, teachers, students, educators. I should be able to ask the district and find out exactly how much money am I getting in those 3 pots. Does our district get in 2 pots? Because the district has to turn around and talk about how it's spending those dollars. So we should be able to find out how much it is you're getting for those spots. So we believe that's an important thing that should happen. The last one is community collaboration. Local control is another thing. Equity, local control, and flexibility. Those are three things that were touted in the legislature to get this law passed. Local control means everybody here should have an opportunity to contribute to how your district spends those dollars. Okay? So we believe community collaboration is going to be key. It is an expectation, but right now people are fighting about, well, what does it really look like? How much should I include the community? What are the models for doing it? What's the expectation? Those are conversations you should start having with your districts right now. What next? So where do I start? Go ahead. Schedule a meeting with your school board members and your district leaders to ask. Right now is a good time. How are you planning to use your LCFF funding to increase and improve services for those low-income students, foster youth, and English learners? Next. 4 key questions you might want to start the conversation with. How much did the district receive in supplemental concentration grant funding for high-need students? How are you going to spend this funding? Because it's true, there are no categoricals. Districts aren't required to do it. It doesn't mean the need went away, and districts could still do that if they wanted to. Okay? The need didn't go away. Just because the categorical says it's gone, the money can still, you still will get a funding source for your district budget. It's up to you now to decide, because that's what the governor said. The local level, people know how to address their issues and their needs. And if one of those categorical programs and services was still something you think is important, you should ask, will it still be there? How will these choices improve student outcomes? That's key. That's what matters most. How are we making sure that at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how many stakeholders are there, are our kids getting what they need to have the opportunity to reach their highest potential? Student outcomes. And then the last thing is, what's the district's plan for involving parents? Those are easy questions. They're not threatening. They just want to know. Okay? Next. And then I'm almost done. Okay, so state advocacy. The state board could help define some of these things. If you have an idea that you think, well, I think the parents should really be involved, I think that we should have fiscal transparency. Here's how you get involved, because right now the state board is deciding, and oftentimes the state board, districts will do what the state board tells them to do. Okay? So there is a meeting on the 7th where these regulations will be decided. Here's the timeline for how that will take place. I want to point out Fair Share for Kids, because I only have 30 more seconds. If you want to know everything that's happening related to this, the advocacy level, at the local level, the state level, visit Fair Share for Kids. Right now, we're going to go relaunch live in about a week. We'll have updated information. One more. Parent and community involvement. Right now, your LCAP, that accountability plan, it says you have to have these things. But people, like I said, are fighting about, what does those words really mean? Like, how much do I really need to have it? Or what if I want to have more than what it says there? Those are for communities and educators and leaders, school leaders to have these conversations. And I think this is part of that. Next one. I want to say, Fair Share for Kids, in a week, we're going to launch a conceptual website that's going to help you find out numbers. How much money are the students bringing to your district? You'll be able to put your district in there. And you'll be able to say, let's start the conversation. Is this true? And maybe the district says, no, it's not, and here are my reasons why not. But at least you have some information from a source that has no other interest than to make sure the community has information to be equal stakeholders in the conversation. So at some point, in about a week and a half, visit Fair Share for Kids. You'll be able to look at your own districts. And you'll be able to see what percentage of those dollars have been given according to those 3 pots.
Thank you, Val. And now, another advocate from Public Advocates, Rigel Massaro. Did I say that right?
You did.
Thank you. All right. And then after her, we will hear from a student from James Lick High School, and then we'll move on to questions.
And Darcy, can you pull up my PowerPoint, please?
Was it on that?
Same thumb drive. Yeah, it says Rigel's PowerPoint. Hi, my name is Rigel Massaro, and I'm an attorney with Public Advocates. We are a nonprofit civil rights law firm in San Francisco and Sacramento. We work in the areas of education, housing, and transit, always with the intention that we are increasing access for the low-income students of color, immigrants in our state. I'm going to talk briefly about the parent and student and community involvement piece, as well as touch on briefly the equity piece. And so our belief is that parents and students need to be involved in this process to ensure that it works. It must meet local needs, and I don't know who knows better than what belongs in our schools than the kids that go there every day, all day long, right? And their parents who've seen these districts, K through 12, and understanding where are we missing pieces? What does my kid need? If those people aren't involved, we're gonna have a real problem. And so I'm here to hopefully get especially the students and the parents in the room fired up about getting involved and asking the questions Val posed to districts and their schools. Sorry, this is hard to see, but I'll just say what's on there. Can I have the next slide, please? So you've heard both Mr. Hernandez and Val quote the governor. The director of finance said that the law is very clear that the dollars being provided through supplemental and concentration grants, that's 70 cents, right, that the student who is low income, English learner, or foster youth can be generating in a school, in a district with a high amount of those students. They have to be spent on supplemental services for the students which they are being provided. They must be. It's in the law. And the regulations, as we hear, are being worked out in terms of what precisely does that mean. Next, please. So many people have touched on the LCAP, so I'll be brief and focus on a couple what I think of as key provisions, especially for students and parents to think about. And these are 3-year plans, so the first plan is due July 1, and it's going to govern your district for the next 3 years. There'll be annual updates, right, but 3-year plans. And what's really awesome about the LCAP is that it's focusing on a broader definition of school success. So we all know that school success is more than a test score, and these priorities really do capture that. And I'll go into some of the examples in just a moment. So the state board is going to be adopting a template in March. And as soon as that template comes out, we're going to hear a real buzz from parents and students and districts thinking, how do we make this template work for us and our needs? And I would urge you to begin mobilizing and thinking about your needs before March, so when that comes out, you're ready to hit the ground running with your district. And you know, what the beauty and some of the danger in LCFF is maximizing the flexibility that comes locally. You ask, how did we get 50 categoricals, right? Well, it was because there were needs that were not being met by locals. The state said, well, we need to mandate that, right? So we do have a danger in ensuring that the needs are actually not met. The LCAP, and all this, the broader definition of school success and forcing districts to explain how we're going to meet goals in all of these areas is a constraint on the flexibility that is going to, we hope, guarantee a real school success and district success in our state. So there are 8 different priorities, state priorities, and there's also a clause in the law that says create your own local priorities. So please don't feel limited by the 8 state priorities. I'm just 3 here, because 5 minutes is a short period of time, to think about in terms of parent and student involvement. So one of the priorities that districts must explain how they're going to meet is parent involving, including efforts districts will make to seek all parents' input in making decisions for individual schools and the district as a whole, and how districts will promote parental participation in programs for disadvantaged students and students with exceptional needs. And by disadvantaged, we're flagging the students in poverty, English learners, foster youth. So these do tend to be the parents and guardians that are most likely not involved in school decision making. Here's the mandate: to get those people, find them, train them, and have them involved in decision making. Priority number 5 is around, is around student engagement, as measured by attendance, absenteeism, dropout, and graduation rates, right? So if you can pass a test, that's great. We want you actually engaged in school. And probably, if you're not doing well on the test, there's also an issue with being engaged at school. And a priority number 6 is around school climate, as measured by suspension and expulsion rates and other student measures, I'm quoting the law here, including surveys of pupils, parents, and teachers on the sense of safety and school connectedness. So I know these are issues that hit home for a lot of parents and students, and I want you to be well aware. These are priorities that districts must write down goals for, strategies for, at both the district and the school level, and outline how they're going to meet them for high-needs students and all students. So our vision at Public Advocates, we're also a member of the Campaign for Quality Education, which is a coalition of several dozen grassroots and community groups, including CFJ, and we've organized for about 10 years in support of weighted student funding or local control funding formula. Probably some of the students that are here today, and I know Igdalia and Rosa, were in Sacramento in May pushing for this because you know what, no matter how the economy is doing, we need equity in our schools, and we need it because we know, research has said for decades, that low-income English learner and foster youth take more money to educate. Schools need to give them more support so they can succeed. We know this. We know this regardless of how much money we're bringing in. So that formula is in place. It's in the law, and it will remain in place. So this is very important. We have this vision that students, families, and communities are supported by their districts and by their schools to share responsibility so that every student can become college and career ready. We have a vision that participation in learning, leadership, and advocacy is expanded so individual schools, students, and entire schools are making high levels of academic achievement. So how do we do this? We need to begin training ourselves and asking for training of our districts, hooking up with community-based organizations and determining standards and goals for meaningful engagement. And we need to do it now. This is the first year of implementation, right? So this is the first year we can begin these conversations. We need to get off on the right foot and be involved in these conversations. The law, just briefly, the law also has some other clear provisions around parent involvement. Lamentably, the law is silent on student involvement, even though student engagement is very important. That doesn't mean, students, that you can't get involved. That just means we all know that people act outside the law all the time and often in that way change it. So please feel empowered to do so. But district level committees, the law says that the district's going to have a parent advisory committee, and many districts already do. So that committee is going to be charged with mobilizing parents and ensuring that parents have a voice in the table in the LCAP process, right? So it's very important that find out, does my district have a parent advisory committee? Can I get on it? And if I can't get on it, who are those parents and how can they be held accountable to the rest of us? And then if the district has a critical number of English learners, they need to have a district level English learner advisory committee. And both of these bodies have a specific role to play in the LCAP development. As a side note, LCFF does not eliminate, does not affect school site councils and school-level English learner advisory committees. Those continue, and ideally, of course, there is dialogue, right, between the school site council and the parent advisory committee, and the school-level ELAC and the district-level DLAC, right? And it does say, the law is clear that LCAPs must be consistent with school plans. And finally, there is, could you do the last slide, please? Thank you. So these are just some pieces in the law. The community does get to submit written comments on the LCAP. They get to attend a public hearing where they get to talk about the LCAP and the budget before either are decided on. The district will publish the LCAP online, and any community member has the right to file a complaint on the creation, what's in the LCAP or the enforcement thereof. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Like some of the cards that are coming in, the questions are being answered as we go around student involvement and parent involvement. But I'm very excited to now turn it over to Maria Marquez. She's a James Lake High School student and a member of Californians for Justice.
Hi, my name is Maria Marquez. I'm a senior at James Lake. I have been involved with CFJ for about 2 years, and I want to thank everyone for coming today. I feel really proud to be in CFJ and campaign to win the ECHO funding because
could you stand up just so everybody can hear you? I'm sorry. Just make sure that everybody in the back can hear you, okay?
okay. So I feel really proud to be involved in CFJ to win the ECHO funding for school. I remember attending a rally this May planned by my peers in CFJ to push our decision makers in the need as students. And it was important to me to be in that rally because my boy's student was hurt. This is a historical picture for CFJ, we have been fighting for equal funding for about 10 years, and it's really important, and we're really happy that LCFF means for our community and across our state. LCF not only means money, but what really means is getting A3G done and having more students graduating and having a clean environment and having the things that we need for class every day. LCFF is about that victory, but most important about better quality life of students around the campus. My older sister was an LDS student for about 4 years, and when she had challenge classes, she didn't understand the context, and unfortunately she didn't get to graduate because she didn't pass both cases, but she stayed in school till the last day. It was sad because she was an inspiration for me and my siblings, but I think she would have made it if she had the enough support she needed. And thanks to this law that passed, LCFF, the students that are in my sister's situation, hopefully they get enough support that they needed to graduate high school. And also I want to encourage parents and students to get more information about LCFF and how can they help to get more funding for school. And also I want to encourage students to turn their free and reduced lunch application, because not only mean to get free lunch in school, but also mean getting your SAT, ACT for free. And also if you have any AP test, you only pay $5 instead of $89. And you will help to get the 55% in the community that we need to get the funding concentration. And if 87 of students turn their free and reduced lunch, then everyone in the school will get free and reduced lunch. So LCFF we still have a lot to be done, but most important, the need in our district, and we need to make sure that the funding that provided by our students go to the people that need it. We want a better education for low-income, ELD, and students of color. And please stay around for the small group discussion that we're going to have after this panel. Thank you for the time.
Again, and thank you for all your expertise in the area. And principal of James Lick High School, Glenn Vanderdy, couldn't be here tonight because Eastside Union is having a study session, but he did tell Darcy and I earlier that, right to your point, Maria, that last year James Lick High School had about 62% free and reduced lunch, and they got the word out to families that it wasn't just about free and reduced lunch, it was about all these other incentives that would come to the students and to the district, and it increased by 79% here. So that means more money coming to James Lick, and that was about direct outreach and really helping families and parents to understand what they were really signing up for. So we're already bringing more money into the community. So again, moving over to questions, and I think one of the questions that was brought up that hasn't been touched on here tonight is there a plan, or is early childhood education at all included in this? Because we know an early start is a better start for all of our kids. Does anybody have an answer to that? Sure.
Yes.
Sure, I can take a shot at it, which is that everything and nothing is included, right? So this is about local decision making. And so this is a perfect area for advocates to come to the table and say, early childhood is really important for us. I mean, there are so many pieces on the table right now. There are staffing issues, and there's early childhood, there are books, there are facilities. There's a big pot of money that's now it's up to the locals to figure out how to spend it. And that's a huge decision that people have to be making, and it really does require all stakeholders at the table. So there's no categorical, there's no mandate that be part of it. There's nothing precluding early childhood from being funded in a way that works for the local district.
I do think, though, there are some early childhood dollars that have
I want to stand up to make sure everybody in the back can hear it.
folks know differently. I think there are some early childhood dollars that were protected outside of LCFF that will still fund pre-K programs. It just depends if your district is in fact receiving those dollars. The other issue is if your district can make the claim that early childhood ed is what's going to contribute to achieving those 8 priorities the state has put out, then that investment can be used as part of LCFF dollars, as Rigel was saying. So, so the answer to that question is yes and yes.
Okay, great. So we know that in addition to this transition, we have Common Core transitioning right now. And so you touched on the measurements for our new favorite acronym, LCAP. Just when we thought we had enough acronyms in our life, now we have LCAP, Local Control and Accountability Plan. So can you touch a little bit more on the measuring tools used that in terms of the improvement that we're all going to be held accountable for, and how does the Smarter Balance Assessment that's going to be used for Common Core, how does that relate?
Well, I'd like to say that with the Common Core standards, I shared with you that over $1 billion was allocated for Common Core, and that will be used in 3 areas: staff development, curriculum, and technology. What's happening right now is that a lot of our school districts are not equipped in technology to support a Smarter Balance test. A lot of districts are having a hard time trying to figure out how are we going to increase the bandwidth and how are we going to have more hardware for our students to be able to take the test. So you got this pot of money, they're telling you can use it for 3 things, so now it's a shuffle. Where do we do? Do we put 2/3 in technology and a piece here in professional development and a piece in curriculum? You know, it's a hard game to play. One of the things that we say is that as far as educators is that they have to have the proper staff development. Educators are the program. If the teachers are not going to be equipped and if they're not going to be properly trained in dealing with Common Core, it's going to be a program that's going to fail. So it's really important that we look at how we're going to be spending the money for ongoing the education piece. That's why there's a lot of collaboration going on between educators and school districts with curriculum groups to look at how are they going to roll out Common Core. In a lot of districts, the train has already left the station. And the thing is that a lot of people are having to play catch up because it's already left. And so districts are having to start doing staff development time for the teachers. There's a lot of piloting for lesson plans that haven't been done. There's still this whole, we're not sure what we're supposed to do, but we're going to move forward. And it's kind of like somebody used an adage about you're building the plane while it's flying. Well, I don't like that because if the plane's not being fixed while it's flying, it's going to crash. So it's going to be really important that we have a good accountability, a good plan for the LCF, for the Common Core. And as it relates to the LCFF, is that it's going to be important that that plan, which includes parents, which includes community, which includes just about everybody, the stakeholders, they all have to understand the process. They have to understand how the money is going to be vested. And they have to understand that this is basically, a lot of it's the same money, it's just been reshuffled. And what we fear sometimes is the cannibalization of categorical programs. Basically what you had before here in a base revenue limit program, where you had all these categories, now everybody's fighting to get that money. And it's like that one big bone and everybody wants a piece of that bone. And so the question is, can we work collaboratively to make sure that the students are getting what they need, especially the ones that are generating the 70% over the dollar.
And I'll just add that the second, one of the state priorities that I didn't highlight up there is implementation of the state standards, particularly the Common Core state standards, and including standards for English learners. And that bill at 1.25 or $1 billion that's rolling out is the equivalent to $140 per kid that each district is receiving right now. So it's another real area for parents and students to get involved and just inquire, how is my district, you know, we notice that we don't have the computers. We think that's important, but we also know the PD is important, the professional development, getting involved in those conversations and learning how that money is being spent. That's money for these first 2 years of implementation.
And I would add that it's again evidence that LCFF is not the final solution. Funding education at higher levels is. This is a funding formula for what we have now. And there are clear decisions that will need to be made. And the measurements of what does it mean to actually place your bet on these certain things. That's where communities as a whole, educators, parents, teachers, students, you all have to talk about that. Because the accountability at the end of the day It doesn't matter what the adults decide, it's our students who pay the price if we don't make the right choices for their education. And that means if teachers are the program, then we do need evaluation systems that will help us demonstrate if teachers are in fact helping get to the program. And we need to make sure that our school leaders have evaluations, the same way students have tests. And so the point is this conversation are the kinds of things community should be talking about as a whole. Because I don't know about you all, but I grew up in a family where we never had enough. And so the choices we made, we had to make sure they were the right ones to sustain us. And that's what the LCFF promises you all, is to be engaged in that conversation.
So we also know that in our community we've been putting a spotlight on suspensions and expulsions and really working as a community, as schools, juvenile justice partners to reduce those numbers. And I believe one of the measurements we saw was around school climate. So the question is, how can we use LCSF funding to impact student discipline? And I'll just add on positively. How can we make sure that we can use that funding to keep those numbers down, keep our students in the seat and out of the pipeline to prison?
Well, I like to say that 2 years ago, Alum Rock and Eastside Union High School had a public engagement project. It was sponsored by CTA. And we brought in stakeholders from the community. We had 2 community conversations that took place, one here at James Vick High School, the other one at Overfeld High School. We had community engaged in community conversations on how they saw their schools and what needed to be done from the community about their schools. The issue that came up, safety. The issue that came up, communication. The issue that came up, parental involvement. The issue that came up, I mean, there's actually a book with recommendations. Now, I would question, whatever happened to those recommendations? If we're looking at an LCAP program, you have recommendations right there from your community that are still sitting in that booklet that were presented to the 2 school boards. The question is, what happened to it? These were parents. We didn't hear from the teachers. They were not allowed to participate. We did not hear from school board members. They were only allowed to observe. It was community, folks, and students. So there was an accountability plan, in a sense, that was put together by this project. If you dust it off the shelf, I'm sure some of those things still apply today.
Yeah, I would say that you have something to build from. But remember, there are 8 state priorities. And so that's a requirement of the state. Student achievement is one of them. You're going to have to look at those 8 priorities and decide which are the most important to us right now with the money that we have. And so all the other inputs, though, it's going to come from those kinds of recommendations. It's going to come from parents, other educators. All your stakeholders will have something to say. But the reality is this is about a transparent process. Because at the end of the day, like I said, the only ones who go to school here are the students and the parents who get up every day and bring them to school. They're the ones who in fact, are being served by our schools. And I think it matters that you all have a say and understanding and awareness of what the decisions are going to be made.
I think it's only going to strengthen the local efforts here because there is this explicit state priority, and although you do get, you can certainly choose which are the most important, the district does have to report on all of them. So using that as leverage is very powerful. They have to put something in there about what they're doing about school climate. Why not insert what's best for you in your community, which I don't know, and maybe there's already great work done. But
well, I'll make a plug. I know the County Office of Ed is leading the rollout of PBIS, Positive Behavior Intervention Supports, and that is a model that the Federal Department of Education is funding here in San Jose for expansion of, and that it's an evidence-based program that is really, it's a framework for how we can bring a culture with high expectations and lower those referrals and suspensions. So that's something locally that we should all be paying attention to as we look to the LCFF.
Real quick, I just want to say that community needs to be aware that in the LCAP, if you have written questions to the superintendent in that plan, they have to respond in writing. They are required by law. So don't hesitate to ask those tough questions that need to be asked in the LCAP.
I just want to quickly answer. I may be more of a kind of a be careful of the kind of hope that people are putting on the LCFF, because already you talked about early childhood, and we deal with discipline. Schools have been cut by a tremendous amount, $20 billion over the last 4 years. Serious programs have been cut back. It is accurate to say that now you're free to do what you want to do. But like I said, a lot of these programs, you look at the program list that had been listed, that's all gone now. You're looking at, class size reduction is now embedded within LCFF. So now it's in a different form. School safety block grants, that's gone. So if you want to take care of the kids, you have to look at how can I repurpose that. So how do you balance that with all of the demands that communities will want? And the LCAP does come in and say you need to meet all these 8 criteria and whatnot. It's basically a maintenance of effort that we want to get the money that's generated by a student to that student. But remember, you are now running into a lot of pressure that's been packed up for several years, and I can only recommend as parents, don't give up. I know that as you're going forward and asking these questions about, did I get $50 more per student or $60 more per student, as I'm getting at my school site, you also have to recognize that those dollars, a lot of it has been repackaged from what we used to have as categorical programs. Okay? When you want to do something new, you're going to have a hard time doing it, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't. I'm glad to hear that here you have a parcel tax. That's one of the big issues we're fighting for at the state level. Say, can't we let parents determine the fate of their own school by getting more funding in place? You get that you want to do all, the low-performing schools, I've been doing this for 20 years. They used to be called focus schools. They used to be called all kinds of stuff. The struggle to help English language learners, to help poor kids, had never been resolved well. And now we have a formula that's shifting a lot of the money from some schools to those schools that have a lot of poor kids. That's great. But remember, the other schools are now going to be facing rising costs that they can't address. Whereas this school may have some new costs, new money that's really just repackaged money from existing grant programs. So I just want to temper your enthusiasm. I'm with my sisters here who want to fight for more justice, who want to fight for more funding for our schools. That's what CSC is all about. We are trying to get more money for our schools so that we can do more of everything that we want. But I would just caution you not to go too far thinking that the LCFF is going to solve all your problems. It is a lot of it's repackaged money, and then with a little bit of new money because of the economy is doing well, you can do some with it. You have to work with the school board and your school administrators to try to get that done right. So you invest smartly as we move forward in doing the new testing and in trying to figure out how can we hold our schools accountable to deliver for the poorest kids as well as kids who live in good neighborhoods. And that's the struggle that you're going to face. But don't give up. Keep pushing for it. There's some new money. Try to invest that smartly so that your kids can get some new services restored, if not some new ones to improve.
Thank you, Judge. This question sort of touches on what Superintendent De La Torre was talking about earlier in terms of the cost of healthcare benefits and frankly just the cost of doing business in Silicon Valley. And this comment is that the original plan included, and I'm guessing this is maybe a first draft of the LCFF, included regional cost adjustments, but the current plan does not. This puts our entire county at a serious disadvantage. What can we do to fix this? I don't know if COE might want to discuss this. So it sounds like a question about the genesis and what the product we ended up with at the end, but it's expensive to live here. It's expensive to run a business here. So where does that leave us? Anybody want to comment on that? Did the original regional cost adjustments and now we don't?
Well, there is a COLA, the cost of living adjustment, so I'm not really sure.
Whoever wrote this want to comment?
The original plan I'm talking about is not from the governor, it's from Michael Kirst.
Yes.
That's where it started. The governor took it from him and removed the regional cost adjustments.
That was negotiated out in the negotiations in the legislature.
I know, but it does put our entire county at disadvantage.
It does, and that's...
Because it frankly costs more to hire teachers here.
You wouldn't be the only county that
Okay,
would...
hold on, we have two different conversations going on. Thank you for that.
So the comment to that is that there are counties where the cost of living is much higher than others, like Santa Clara County, San Mateo County, versus perhaps Alameda County. And so this doesn't necessarily take that into account because the formula is based on a certain amount.
So when the Board of Ed or when we're waiting for these regs in March, has the train left the station or do we have a chance to sort of right that ship?
The March timeframe is for the local control and accountability plan, so that's when the template comes out. But this budget for the current year,
Okay, so the question is, how do we fix this? We don't.
Legislation.
Yeah, new legislation.
But I also want to
Keep
add,
going, see-
you know, I also want to
yeah.
add that the formula is designed to build it, it's basically built from your old revenue limit. So it already addresses some of these regional differences. If you want to add more to it, you can bring that as an idea to change in the legislative process. But the formula itself was built on all these revenue limits that since 1970 have been designed to try to address some of these equalization problems in our school finance system across the state. I get that you want to change that, but there's already some of that built in, and the COLA was built in. The headache is that the COLA and all these things has a target. You don't actually get that target. You know, that's where the confusion will come in. So there's some of that already addressed, but I would say that, you know, if you want more of it because, you know, San Jose costs more or Santa Clara costs more than a rural district, you can bring that up to the legislative process. It's not that they're against it. It's just that there's, like I said, there's no new money. You just got a set of money that you're shifting around within school districts.
And I would just add, yes, optimism can be tempered, because we live in financial times where we know, we've just gone through it, stuff can happen. We're on an upswing right now in California. And what I want to focus on is what the space that Jai gave us. There's going to be some new money. That's where we need to put our energy on. That's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about go nuts. Hey, let's just spend, spend, spend. No. But the bottom line is you're an equal stakeholder in the process. Just like your educators are, just like your superintendent is, just like your school bus drivers are, parents, students, an equal say. And I want to focus on what the hope is that he gave us, because he gave us he did leave space for hope. He did.
I'm an optimist.
And I lived off of hope because I was born poor, and that was the only thing that got me through it. So we need to think about what is it we want for our future and for our kids with what we have. That's all.
And as Dr. Ochoa mentioned, there are a couple things coming up that people do have power to influence in Sacramento. We talked a lot tonight about questions to ask your district, and that's applicable, of course. But there are also a couple conversations happening this year where there is potential to move the needle a little bit. And so one of them is the March deadline for the state adopting the LCAP template. And so ensuring that the template has all the blanks that you would like your district to fill in is very important. But even before that, the state board is adopting regulations in January. And these regulations, I think several folks have mentioned, and I know Val mentioned, and those regulations are going to explain what does it mean to spend in proportion to the funds. And I have to be honest with you all here that there's some real danger out there that that's being watered down. That in fact the nexus between what the superintendent said about the 70 cents and it being creating services or improving services is actually at risk right now at the state board. And we actually really do need parents and students to come out and say, no, if the students are generating those funds must be spent. And they must be spent. We're not talking some obscure weird way. We can calculate how much can be spent. In a few weeks, we can go on Fair Share for Kids and find out. That money should be spent on those students. And there are, positions of people in the room I very much respect, including CTA, saying that that shouldn't be a tight nexus. And so just, we believe that funds and services should be married and not divorced. So please do keep that in mind. The form that I passed out, this green form, has here some information about, it has my contact information if you're interested in coming to the state board. I also know Rosa and Italia are doing a lot of work to get students and parents at that event, so please see them as well.
I think there was someone else in the audience from CTA. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, remember this is 5 years of cuts that we've been affected by. This LCSF thing is a program by where we're going to take 8 years, basically, to over, between the 5 years and the 8 years, a 13-year time period to get us back to where we were in 2006-07. So it's not like we're going to be tremendously flush with money, but it's a first step. And so the question was asked, how do we make this better and how do we get here? Talk to your legislator. That's really the answer. Because how this thing happened as opposed to the first iteration of it was, there was a compromise between legislators right at the very end to make it what it is today. And so that's what we're saying. It's a first step, remember. And it doesn't guarantee equity for students. It's a first step. Because roughly 10% of the districts in the state still get 2 to 3 times as much money per student as we're getting per student here on the East Side. So remember, it's a first step.
Well, I want to thank our panelists and a wonderful education on both sides, and we're going to continue the dialogue, but we want to thank the panel for their presentation.
So now I'm going to bring up the Honorable Teresa Castellanos from San Jose Unified School District, who's going to talk to you a little bit about our next piece. And again, thank you so much to our panel. This was such an amazing conversation that I know many of us have not been able to have yet in our community. And this will be just one of what we know will be many conversations, and Kim will talk about next steps after. But Teresa, if you want to come up and talk a little bit about what we plan to do next.
Okay. So we know that we just talked about a lot of information. And we know that we just bombarded you with all kinds of stuff. I think the exciting thing about this is that it's an opportunity for our communities to dialogue and for our communities to participate in what education will be in the present and in the future. As newly elected to San Jose Unified, I've been fascinated how education is a very private process in a collective space. And as a community, we don't normally think about us, and we don't normally think about the whole group, and we don't normally think about the whole district. Normally we think about our school, we think about our teacher, we think about, and it doesn't go to the whole district. So I think the opportunity about LCFF and Common Core is that idea of how do we engage, how do we organize, how do we connect, and how do we make those collective demands. And that is what truly is exciting about LCFF, along with Common Core, that we are faced with an opportunity. And we all know, especially in education, that a potential is not an outcome. A potential means we had the potential, and that you have to work hard to get to that outcome. And so I think that is what we're facing with LCFF and Common Core, is that we have a potential, we have an opportunity to use this to benefit our communities, to use this to engage, to use this to organize. And so for me, that is incredibly exciting, because I've been a parent for 17 years, and this is not an opportunity that I had. And so it is very exciting that you guys have this opportunity now. And so what we're going to do is that we're going to break up in 3 groups. And hopefully this is not the last time you're talking about this topic. I hope that this is the first time that you're talking about this topic. And this is an ongoing discussion that we are going to be having for the next 3, 4, 5 years, so that LCFF does reach its potential. Because we all know this is not the program that's going to fix everything. But it is one step in a process to begin to fix the things that are broken in our educational system. So we're going to divide up into 3 groups: students, parents, and community members.
There were concerns raised, like how do you get non-parents involved? And whatnot. There were tons of ideas. PACT as an organization, churches, CFJ, obviously, PTSAs can get involved. Community forums can be held. Maybe those outside groups can sponsor community forums. But near the end, we realized the district leadership, the superintendents, the school board members have to kind of, in a sense, take the lead to reach out to a lot of the community groups that might not be aware of what's going on. Anything? Second question was, what should additional funding be spent on? There was quite a bit of talk about technology. Technology both in the sense of allowing people maybe accessing tablets or something for student use, not just tablets, but even technological development training so that kids could learn more about apps. There was talk about partnership with corporate partners. A point was made that local districts clearly should have the control over this. It shouldn't be one size fits all kind of solution. Then there were some mention of the need for, in our district at least, counselors and mental health services. Eastside actually could be a model, perhaps, on-site community health, mental health services. And early education is another thing that came up and was emphasized as an important thing. Would anyone like to add to that? And the third question was how to ensure the district's accountability or evaluation as time goes on. That one we only had a couple of minutes for. I think we were a bit confused. There's a stipulated to be a committee, district-wide committee to monitor the development of the accountability of the, right? So we're not quite sure. I don't remember we got very far on that.
Well, the thinking was, I mean, there has to be a stakeholder engagement, but does there have to be a committee within the district that's looking at this?
Parent advisory committee.
A parent advisory.
Is it going to have a new name, the local community funding
I think it's
committee?
in CFF, essentially, it's called the parent advisory. It basically, it used to be a functioning parent advisory committee, and it says you can use existing committees.
Okay, because we do have DLAC and we do have, so that's my report.
What we talked about is that we really need to push for like student voice in this stuff, because I honestly don't think that parents know all of the things that we want, because we don't go home and tell our parents like what we want. Like, I don't go to my mom and say like, this food is terrible, the bathrooms are disgusting and smell like rot, and like,
Gee, my kids do that all the time.
I honestly don't think many people tell their parents. So we also want to make sure that the students, like not just us, because this is like a very select group of people, we want everyone like to know about this, because when we were like turning in our lunch forms, we don't tell people what it's for. They say, okay, fill it out and turn it in. You just have to. People don't know what it's for, so they don't have an incentive for that. And I think more people would be interested in this stuff if we told them exactly what it was. And for ideas of how we could spend this money, I honestly really believe in like after school programs and stuff. Like not just tutoring, year up and summer school, but I believe in like sports and all these other things that can keep students occupied. Because I think students don't have many things to do. So after school they're like influenced by like negative things, and they don't have any like moral values. So if you like funnel more money into like sports and stuff, like there's a minimum GPA requirement for that, and so many kids want to play sports but they don't get grades, and they're always like talking trash about like, the sports things, like, oh, we don't get money, we don't get jerseys, we have to pay this money for this. Like they don't want to put in their own money to get their equipment. Like honestly, I had to pay like $220 for my cross-country team this year, and that's a lot of money that's out of my pocket. I don't have all of that money, so it's kind of difficult to do that every year. And we also have to engage like teachers like in this too. Like they need to be aware of that. Libraries have them open like every day, not just like Tuesdays, Thursdays, or like at lunch. That's kind of like counterproductive to what a library is in a school. And smaller class sizes, of course, but I think that's already covered by the LCFF, so I don't really need to address that, because I think students need to connect with their teachers more, because if you have like a class size of 40, it gets really loud in there, and you don't really get to like communicate with your teacher that well. I think that connection is really important when you're talking to people. And one super important thing that I want to happen is like student psychologists, because, or like psychologists for the students, because a lot of students at our schools have very bad mental problems. Like it's like very generic, like adolescent stuff, but you know how hard it gets for people, right? So some people don't have people to talk to, and I think this would be really important to like push for that. Mental health is like something we really have to stress at these things, because like it drives people insane. Like people get depressed and things, they don't get motivated, they don't want to do this, that. They don't want to do their homework, they don't want to like participate in sports, they don't want to go to school. This is why they're like truants and stuff, so they're basically wasted potential. Like they're just people who are like there. They don't want to do anything. It's like, just because a student feels like they shouldn't do something, you shouldn't like just leave them like that. You have to push to like make these people motivated to do things, because it's very difficult to like just say, oh, we'll just tell these students to like do this stuff. I don't really care about these students, like they can deal with themselves. Like you can't motivate someone to like go to school just because you give them some truancy letter, like here you have to go to school because you're breaking the law. They don't really care about that, honestly. Like I know people exactly like that. They will come to school like late every single day just because they don't really care. But like I'm late, I really dislike school, but I'm here because I know I have to be. And I feel like at school, even though I really, really hate it, I know that it's really important for me, and like people do not understand that. And you need to instill this like in their thought process so they can go through the motions the entire way through. And I think that as you get older, you will mature more, and they'll realize how important this is to them in general. So I think I talked way too much. So.
We talked about parent engagement a lot, and so we felt that one of the ways that we can engage parents is by really defining or creating a participatory model for parents, where we outreach to our community organizations that are already being successful in engaging communities and engaging parents in education. So we talked about Somos Mayfair. They've been doing a really successful job in one of the schools, engaging parents, taking like the education to their homes, and providing that opportunity for parents to have a meaningful engagement. And so we thought that developing something like that at the Eastside Union High School District or in Alum Rock or in some of the school districts that we're part of would be really helpful for parents so that, there's ways for them to engage. And part of that is taking advantage of technology that we have already. So making sure that we use them more often, like texting parents could be an option, sending them more emails, doing all the different forms of engagement that we can think of so parents can find different ways to participate. And one thing that we said that is a challenge that because LCFF is not really clear, there's still a lot of questions. It's really hard to engage parents and to get them involved because no one really knows what's going on, and our districts haven't given us the real data and numbers of the funding that they're going to get for every student. So everybody's kind of like, well, how do we provide this information and how do we engage parents if we don't have the answers, right? They're going to be asking us. And so one solution is that we really need to have more human resources available to our parents, to understand things like LCFF, really making it accessible to them, having, this communication available in their languages, in smaller groups, they're able to ask questions and get that information one-on-one. Yeah, I think. Is there anything else that you want to add?
One thing that I brought up is that because this is an opportunity where we're looking at a new funding model, that I think we need to use it as an opportunity to look at a different parent engagement model as well. We have PTAs, school site councils, we have the ELAC and the DLAC, but it's time to shake things up a little bit because we have had those models in our schools, yet we have very low parent engagement. So the question should be is how to engage and how we can use this as an opportunity to just think out of the box. And technology was an example of that, but to invite parents, to make sure it's a welcoming environment for them to feel welcomed and informed and ask, what do you think about this? So what are those methods? And I don't know what they are yet, but opening that door, having that dialogue, and being consistent with the forms and invitations that we put out for our families, because our families, as we know, we're all just so busy and not everybody has the luxury of being out 8 o'clock at night, especially with young children. So it's definitely a challenge, but being consistent with the outreach and the invitation to engage parents and thinking a little bit out of the box.
I'm on the CSBA Board of Directors and I represent Latinos in the state. And this position is new to me, but being on the school board isn't. Okay, I've been on my school board for 10 years. I'm currently the president of the board, so I got on when I was like 15. Not really. Salinas Union High School District, which has the same demographics of a lot of, we have 85% Hispanic, 3% socioeconomic, disadvantaged, and so I want to speak from the perspective of a school board member, not as a CSBA person. I'll tell you that in a minute, but. I think it's refreshing to hear what you say about parent involvement, because if you parents are not at the table advocating for your students and you students are not there advocating for yourself, especially for English language learners, I guarantee you in Salinas we have our South Side who have all the money. Your South Side parents, I don't know if that's South Side over here, will be at the table and they will be advocating for their students, and so you need to be there. I have decided, I'm finishing my master's degree in December, and now my thesis is on parental involvement at the level of the school board, because I have said for the past 10 years I've been at board meetings, and the majority of those meetings, 90%, is an empty room. The only people that are there are the unions and their reporter. And that's it. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but when they come and they want their interests heard, they're the only ones there so they get heard. And so this is a new funding mechanism, and it's historic, and you need to be here. You need to be there, you need to be at the table, because the other people who want different things than what you want will be there, and they will be pushing for it.
You need to do this in every school district.
And you need to do this in every school district. And as a CSBA person, I have pushed really hard that we need to, at my level at the board of directors, that we need to address the needs of English language learners, insofar that I'm having a session at our yearly conference, our annual education conference, regarding the needs of English language learners. And Shirley Spiegel-Coleman from Californians Together will be giving this presentation, which means that I actually got an expert in this field. And so our students not only need to learn the language of English, but the academic language of English. And so it's twofold. And we need to address that, and we need to not let our school districts and our school board members ignore our students. So I want to thank you, because I learned a lot from what you said, and I will take it back to CSB. Thank you.
I'll be here from Selena and representing CSBA. So our very last remarks on what to expect next, and we know this is just one conversation, laying the foundation. We're going to have many more conversations in this community, right, CFJA and everyone else? So Kim's going to just, from the Allen Mark Educational Foundation and District 5 United, is going to give us our next steps.
So I just want to make sure that everybody signed in, because one of our very next steps is, when all the presentations are available, we're going to email them to everybody who signed in and was present. You see the guy in the camera in the back, that's Juan Estrada, he's president of District 5 United. The video will go up on District 5 United's website. When he announces that to our leadership, I will forward that to everybody on this list as well, because you know families that couldn't come or people that wanted to know this, they'll be able to go online, they'll be able to see the video, hear the whole presentation, see the PowerPoints. We'll have all those available online as well, because we want to have more dialogues. The foundation is committed to sponsoring and helping plan more dialogues. We'd like to see more happen in the winter, where we start talking about the whole thing about what do we want at our schools, what do our kids need. We need to do that between now and March, so that when that template is approved in March, we aren't going to say, okay, now we know you have a template, let me tell you. We want to say, oh, this is your template, we want this, we want this, we want this, we want this. That's how we want to be ready. And then we want to meet again toward the end of the school year, when the districts are first putting their drafts of their plans together, so that we can make sure everything we told them we wanted is actually in there. And if it's not, we want to know why. Not just what's in there and why it's in there, but what's not in there and why. And it's our responsibility. If we don't ask the tough questions, we're not going to get any answers. And we don't get answers a lot because we don't ask the questions. So we're going to have a whole series on asking